Good morning and welcome to another exceptional CERRE event. Despite the promising prospect of meeting 2030 climate targets, net zero by 2050 remains a technologically challenging policy goal. It will indeed require an unprecedented effort to decarbonize in the next 30 years, 3 times faster than what has been the rate of emissions reduction in the last 3 decades. It will also force us to rethink our European and national regulatory frameworks and tools. Against that background, electricity and gas coupling in a decarbonized economy, the brand new CERRE report lays out policy avenues to be pursued by the EU to avoid blocking the path to net zero. Are they saying that this report should no doubt be deemed as a landmark contribution to European energy policy, building up on state-of-the-art modeling of a variety of energy system scenarios to reach deep decarbonation by 2050. The report concludes with 41 regulatory and policy recommendations. These consider the challenge of building flexibility and resilience into a joint system approach, including immediate next steps and near-term policy. The research project on which this report is based has been a comprehensive and challenging endeavor for which I would like to already thank very warmly the authors, Professor Michael Pollitt, a CERRE academic co-director and professor at the University of Cambridge, and Dr. Chi Kong Cheong, a CERRE research fellow and director of the Cambridge Energy Policy Forum. Dissecting the enigma of sector coupling has revealed to be far from an easy task. But as I hope you will be able to assess by yourselves in the next 150 minutes, the authors have done an impressive job. They've also benefited from fantastic inputs from a highly diversified group of CERRE member organizations, including corporations and regulatory authorities active in the gas and electricity sectors who have sponsored the project. Let me remind you, however, that in accordance with the bylaws of CERRE, sponsors bear no responsibility whatsoever in the contents of this independent report. In addition, the views expressed in it are attributable only to the authors and do not necessarily correspond either to the views of CERRE or of any sponsor or of any other member of CERRE. I'd also like, at the beginning of this session, to pay publicly a tribute to the dedication of Massimo Miccinilli, who has led this project to its successful completion with the support of his colleagues from our think tank secretariat, and in particular, John McSweeney, Sophia Greason, and Alessandra Botta. We've titled this morning's event, Reaching Net Zero, Scenarios and Regulation to Rethink Sector Coupling. We've divided the proceedings into 2 sessions. Each one will consist in a presentation of a part of the report and be followed with a panel discussion with senior representatives from the EU institutions and key industry and regulatory players from the gas and electricity sectors. The first session will focus on the study's scope and goals, on the main results of the 4 net zero scenarios modeled by the authors, and on the challenges and implications of these results for the energy system of the future. And in a second stage, we'll shift the conversation to policy and regulatory issues and focus on the report's main recommendations. So now, before we start, just allow me to quickly remind you a few house rules. This event is live streamed on CERRE site www.cerre.eu, and on CERRE's YouTube channel. It will also remain on those sites for later viewing, and therefore the Chatham House rules are not applicable. Second, we also inviting you to join the debate on Twitter using the hashtag sector coupling. And finally, due to time constraints, the authors will have to summarize in 2 times 15 minutes the presentation of their very comprehensive and detailed report. This will therefore only allow them to highlight the main features of their extensive work. However, for the benefit of those of you who may want to have subsequently, in addition to the full report, which is available on the CERRE site, a more thorough audiovisual presentation by the authors, this will be recorded soon, and we will put it online on our site. So I'll now give the floor to Com for a first 15-minute presentation of the study's objective, scope, and scenario results. Com, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bruno, for this introduction. Let me just put the slides on the screen. I hope all the panelists can see slides on their screens.
Go ahead, Com.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor for me to join this event along with our distinguished speakers and panelists. On behalf of our entire research team, I would like to thank our sponsors and CERRE for supporting our research project. It would be not an exaggeration to say that
it's okay, Kong. You can continue. Your slides are on the live feed, so go ahead. Please, Kong, go ahead with your presentation. We can see it on the live feed. Michael, can you please take over? Can one of the 2 authors please start the presentation? You are on mute, Kong.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, please go ahead. Your presentation can be seen anyway, even if you don't see it on your screen. Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Start the presentation.
Yes, on behalf of our entire research team, I would like to thank our sponsors and CERRE for supporting this research project. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the product of this research is a truly team effort, not just the academic teamwork behind it, but also many, many hours of discussion via Zoom and MS Teams with our sponsors about our research challenges in a circumstance where we all needed to adapt to the then new COVID-19 reality, making our research and engagement less colorful than we had hoped for. I'm also lucky and honored to have the opportunity to work with my colleagues at Cambridge over the past 18 months on this project. And I'm hoping that in the next 15 minutes of this elevator speech, I will do justice to represent many, many days and months of their efforts and research. I would like to thank Professor Michael Pollitt, Dr. David Reiner, Dr. Carmen Lee, Rebecca Lee, and Drew Ruck, Agarwal. Without their help, none of this would be possible today. So without further ado, for the rest of the time allocated, I will briefly cover 5 areas of our research project. So I will go briefly through the scope and goals of this research. I will very quickly mention our energy system model that we use for this project. And obviously, I will focus on the key messages coming out from the 4 scenarios that we model. I will then recap main findings, which hopefully will give ideas to stimulate the discussions amongst our panelists further. So at the conception of this research project, we have been quite lucky to have time to discuss among our academic team, but also with CERRE about our research questions that would not just make a policy and business impacts on energy and climate policy making, but also allow us as academics to be at the forefront of academic research on energy and climate economics and modeling. So therefore, we set out to answer 2 research questions. First one being, what are the sources of flexibility under gas and electricity sector coupling and their role in deep decarbonized energy system? The second question is, what are the complementary dimensions and trends of different energy sources and vectors? In practice, we had 2 objectives for this research. First one is to remodel and calibrate our 2 out of 4 scenarios to the relevant long-term scenarios that the European Commission has analyzed in its 2050 long-term strategy. And based on extensive modeling results, not just the 4 baseline scenarios that we're going to present today, but also the 54 sensitivity simulations to propose a set of policy and regulatory recommendations to build the first blocks of efficient gas and electricity sector coupling to reach net zero at least cost. Now, although for many energy system modelers and energy economists, defining sector coupling might be rather straightforward. We define sector coupling or energy system integration as integrating the energy consuming sectors such as buildings, transport, and industry, and optimizing them with the supply sector. But in the context of this research, we focus on coupling between gas and electricity system, taking into account explicitly their joint interactions with the energy consuming sectors and key end use technologies. So therefore, given this definition as a starting point, we focus on the key set of technologies on the sector coupling side. So we consider it power to gas and power to liquids at the sort of like midstream and upstream level, but also we consider hybrid heat pumps closer to the end use demand level as a sector enabled technologies, sector couple enabled technologies. We also consider sources of flexibility that might enable us to reach net zero. And those we conceptualize to come from networks, so gas and electricity grids, system integration technologies or sector coupling technologies that would allow us to have a more flexible energy system. And obviously storage technologies in the gas and electricity supply system that could contribute to the flexibility in reaching net zero. Now, this is really our elevator speech of a complex pan-European energy system model, which is a challenge, perhaps comparable to some of the challenges that we outline in reaching net zero. So in short, and without exaggeration, our energy system model is one of the most advanced models capable of representing energy system with high level of details, ranging from modeling individual countries to including hourly time steps, without which it would be not possible to quantify the requirement of for system flexibility in reaching net zero scenario. And at the start of our project, we deemed absolutely necessary to include key individual countries in Europe and hourly time dynamics in our model that would complement European Commission's models, such as primes, for example, which uses a rather coarse time and geographical dimension, and hence potentially neglecting some very important economic and policy trade-offs. Turning to the headline numbers and results from the 4 scenarios. So this one shows you the results from our net zero baseline final energy consumption. The model sees the final energy consumption reaching around 8,200 terawatt hours. We see a central role of direct electrification in such a net zero system. Electricity satisfies around 51% of final energy consumption. And this is a robust result, which is in line with the European Commission net zero scenarios 1.5 tech. It is in line with many academic modeling work that analyze deep decarbonisation pathways. Now, that said, we also clearly see that other low carbon energy sources, such as bioenergy, hydrogen, carbon neutral synthetic fuels, are gaining importance in supplying final consumption. Their combined share in final demand reaches 36% in our net zero baseline scenario. Now, when we discuss our very first set of modeling results internally, Professor Michael Pollard reminded us that we can all get very excited to see the 2050 numbers, but how to put this into reality and contextualize? Well, I think we need to simply look at the current state of affairs, and the table here shows you 2018 final consumption in Europe. And we know where we are going to, but we should also not forget where we are now. And in 2018, as you can see, our energy system is largely dependent on fossil fuels, majority of which are imported. Renewables and electricity represents only 33% in 2018 final consumption. Therefore, direct electrification of our economies needs doubling by 2050, while 60% of our current final consumption needs to be somehow replaced by carbon neutral energy sources. As you can see, natural gas in 2018 constituted 23% of the final consumption, predominantly to heat our homes. Oil and petroleum products constituted 37% in 2018 final consumption, predominantly in the road transport sector. So reaching net zero requires decarbonisation of those 2 very important economic sectors, but it also requires electricity generation sector to be largely carbon free. And indeed, if you look at this chart from that shows you generation mix in our net zero baseline scenario, you can indeed see that to reach net zero, the electricity generation sector needs to be carbon free. And it is truly zero carbon electricity system, as you can see. For example, renewables share reaches 81% of total generation in our net zero scenario, nuclear 12%, and biomass with CCS 6%. You can also notice that 1% is generation from CCGT. But when CCGT runs, it runs on synthetic gas and biomethane, which are both carbon neutral. So it is indeed a truly zero carbon electricity system. that requires in order to reach net zero. Now, again, if we compare this with the 2018 generation mix, we can only appreciate the scale of challenges and changes that the industry and governments in Europe need to make in a rather short period of time. And here, the challenges and the scale of work ahead in the electricity system itself, if we are serious about reaching net zero, can be appreciated by looking at the historic electricity generation expansion over the past 30 years in Europe and the required generation expansion in the next 30 years to reach our modeled net zero. We can see that relative to 2018 level, electricity supply needs 88% increase in 2050. This is either 5 times the historic growth rate supply if we look at the entire 30 years from 1990 to 2018 as a whole, or 2 times the expansion rate that we saw before the financial crisis of 2008. And it is not just generation expansion. Our net zero scenario requires expansion of certain technologies, as you can imagine. Our net zero scenario requires more than 4,000 terawatt-hours of wind generation by 2050. Now, to put this in the historic context of wind generation expansion, we need to double our historic efforts in getting wind onto the energy system to hit the required level of wind generation in our net zero scenario. However, based on our net zero modeling results and historic trend in getting solar onto the system, we might be more or less on track to hit the solar generation target. So while electricity plays a central role in delivering our net zero target by 2050, the role of bioenergy and its derivatives cannot be overestimated as well. To reach our net zero scenario, we will need more than 3,600 terawatt-hours of bioenergy supply. And this does not seem to be a major constraint if we look at the growth in supply of bioenergy from 1990 to 2019. But what seems to be a challenge is to first scale up the production of biomethane to the required level. So in our net zero 2050, biomethane required is 1,150 terawatt-hours versus production in 2018 reaching only 23 terawatt-hours. This is an increase by a factor of 50 from the current 2018 production level. Now, the second challenge is obviously to scale up the rollout of carbon capture technology in the context where we see rather limited progress in this area. Now, turning to the results by sectors, our modeling also looks at the evolution of energy services demand in buildings and in road transport. In the building sector, we see a major uptake of heat pumps and hybrid heat pumps, with electricity fuel taking 65% of the thermal energy services demand. The main benefits of hybrid heat pump is that of flexibility. Hybrid heat pump in the gas mode mainly runs at peak hours, allowing the overall energy system to be optimized with electricity supply for space and water heating purposes at a stable level. And when hybrid heat pump gas runs, it consumes largely carbon neutral mix of gases, so synthetic gas as well as biomethane and a bit of fossil gas. So turning to the road transport sector decarbonization, it is largely electrified, as you can see, with more than 80% of passenger car fleet and public road transport being electrified. Heavy duty vehicles is dominated by hydrogen-fueled trucks, by gas-fueled trucks, and also 8% by electricity-based heavy-duty vehicles. So in addition to the net zero scenario that I discussed, we also model 3 other baseline variants, which differs along two important dimensions: the level of greenhouse gas emission reduction ambition, and the role of electricity and gas sectors in decarbonization. And we model these baseline scenarios to understand the impacts of moving from 90% GHG reduction target to net zero. And secondly, to understand key drivers of electrification and gasification as a potential solutions to get to net zero. So just as the net zero baseline that I discussed just now, the two extreme both reach net zero, but with different pathways. Net zero electricity, or NZE, heavily relies on electricity, as the name suggests, while the other scenario, net zero gas, or NZG, heavily relies on gases to deliver decarbonization. So, but here in this chart, for simplicity, the final consumption structure is shown only for the three net zero scenarios. So, and in the report, we details the impacts of moving from 90% to net zero as well. As you can see here, changing the main input assumptions around commodity prices, cost of wind and solar, and bioenergy and their availability produces a wide range of outputs. For example, the role of electricity, you can see here in final consumption, ranges from 36% in the net zero gas to 68% in net zero electricity based. So just to summarize five key conclusions from comparing all the four baseline scenarios. But this is far from exhaustive, obviously, and the report details many other insights. As we've said before, we see a central role of electricity in all four scenarios. Share of electricity in final consumption could reach 68% in net zero electricity scenario. We also see central role of CCUS as we move from 90% GHG reduction target to net zero. Because removing the residual 10% emissions requires a fourfold increase in permanent CO2 sequestration based on the modeling results. Thirdly, biomethane supports deep decarbonization in both 90% scenario and also net zero scenarios. While hydrogen plays a prominent role when we need to achieve the net zero target. Residual GHG emission are mainly focused in hard to abate sectors like transport and industry. Power generation sector is largely decarbonized, even in a 90% GHG reduction scenario. So far, we have given you some headline numbers and put them in the historic context to inform what policy support might be needed to reach net zero. This last slide outlines what we think is one of our main contributions to the academic work on modeling net zero. It is for this reason that we academic team has worked so hard to set up a multi-regional hourly energy system optimization model with capability to make optimal hourly operational and investment decisions, and which has a complete coupling of supply with end-use demand technologies. It is understanding of the flexibility requirements and sources of those flexibility as we reach net zero, which is deemed to be very important in the academic work. So our energy system should be very well connected to deliver spatial flexibility needed. We need investment in national transmission and distribution grids. We need cross-border interconnection to support rapid rollout of renewables from local to remote locations. Our net zero energy system should be built out all forms of temporal flexibility to deliver net zero. First of all, we need investment in interseasonal flexibility or support the assets to deliver interseasonal flexibility. For example, we might see traditional seasonal gas storage, albeit at a much smaller scale than today, We might see emergence of new forms of seasonal storage. For example, green hydrogen production and storage to support minimization of curtailments of renewables, and in particular solar generation in the summer times when demand is very low, therefore transforming the free electricity into hydrogen for future periods in consumption of hydrogen in other sectors. We also need...
Excuse me, can I ask you to wrap up now, because we really need to conclude. Thank you.
Yes, just one more minute. Intraday flexibility. We also need hydro-based electrical energy storage and generation. We might see more uptake of vehicle-to-grid from EVs and battery storage. We also might need intraday flexibility in hydrogen supply. And finally, hybrid heat pumps and within-day methane pipeline flexibility will also play a key role in intraday flexibility. So just to recap, the key outcomes of the modeling is we see key role of electricity, but we also see a role for biomethane, hydrogen, synthetic fuels. All modeling scenarios confirm the need to increase both traditional and new forms of flexibility support decarbonization. Overall, net zero remains an extremely technologically challenging policy goal, involving multiple new technology at a scale in a 30-year time frame. And therefore, failure to scale up any of the key technologies that we have outlined, such as renewables, electricity, biomethane, hydrogen, or CCS, will likely block the path to net zero, necessitating a currently unforeseen technological breakthrough in the next 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kong. Clearly, this is a very, very big piece of work. And without further ado, I'd like now to ask Massimo Miccinilli to moderate the first panel discussions on the implications of those scenarios. Max, over to you. Max, mute.
Sorry again. Thank you so much, Bruno and Kong, for the presentation and the kind words. I think we have a very interesting debate ahead of us. I would like to remind all of you that you can ask your questions using Slido, #sectorcoupling. And without further delay, I would like to start introducing our very distinguished panelists. Let me start with Antonio Lopez Nicolas, Deputy Head Director of Renewable and Energy System Integration at DG Energy, European Commission. Welcome, Antonio. Yves Verkamen, he's Transformation Project Director at Fluxys, the Belgian gas TSO. Pascal Fonck, Chief External Relations Officer representing Elia Group, the Belgian Electricity TSO. Then we also have Simone Mori, Executive Vice President and Head of Europe at Enel. And last but not least, Annegret Grevel, Director of International Relations for Venezia, the German regulator. So welcome all again. And I would like to start our conversations and exchanges with the European Commission. So Antonio, how would you react to these different scenarios and main findings presented by our researchers? Do you see some of these scenarios closer to Commission's own forecasts? And probably the last question is, do you think, are we heading to a massive regulatory breakthrough to reach this net zero, or we need some important adjustments in terms of regulation? So Antonio, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Massimo. Thanks a lot to CERRE for the invitation to today's event. I think the report is very interesting, and I think it's hitting the right spots and trying to have a full energy system integration system perspective. So this is very good. It also focuses on how to achieve net zero, how to achieve climate neutrality. I mean, both things together is what keeps us busy these days in the European Commission. As you know, based on the findings of the climate target plan, we are preparing now the Fit for 55 package. We are deep into the impact assessment phase for the different legislative proposals, including energy efficiency, renewables, and the different climate legislation. So this is now going on, and I think this report is looking at the same issues we are looking in our modeling, and we've looked in the climate target plan. So this is very much welcome. You are also having, as I said, a full system perspective, looking not only at the electricity or the gas sector. You are looking at the end use sectors and how to decarbonize the end use sectors and see the role that different energy carriers can play. This is, I think, also something very important that goes in the right direction. So moving to the report itself and trying to reply to your questions. I mean, from what I've seen, the report, I mean, the scenario that could be closer to the Commission long-term strategy and the climate target plan is your core scenario. I would say, I mean, from what we've seen, and I will take this with a pinch of salt because we've not looked at details in depth. So there, I mean, you saw that the best pathway to climate neutrality is a balanced use of various energy carriers with a more diversified energy mix and with stronger links across energy carriers. We echo very much your conclusion that electricity will play an increasingly important role. I mean, in our modeling, as you know, I mean, the electricity sector will pass from being 1/4 of final energy consumption now to half of the final energy consumption in 2050. So this is very much in your assessment. Also, I mean, you have explained that the role of methane, based on biomethane and synthetic methane, will remain important to achieve net zero. And that the role of hydrogen will also be important, especially to reach the full net zero decarbonization in 2050. And this is also very much part of our own Commission assessment, where we see the gas sector playing a very important role. I mean, and gases, renewable and low carbon gases playing a very important role, especially in how to decarbonize sectors. I mean, we see that renewable and low carbon gases would be in our own modeling 2/3 at least of the final energy consumption of gaseous fuels by 2050, mostly hydrogen, but also biomethane and synthetic methane. So all these very much in line. Also, conclusions on policy priorities also reflect the work we've done with energy system integration, with the energy system integration strategy. I think the need to deeply electrify end use sectors based on a larger share of renewables, it's a no-regret option. So this is also very much in line with what we said in the strategies. The importance of joint planning across electricity and gas. This is also an important finding. We agree very much. But also the importance of a more unified level playing field, all-in pricing, as you call it, I think, across energy carriers. For us, this is also a very important element of our vision for an integrated energy system. So all this, I think, is good. Going to your second question, before concluding, if we are heading towards a massive regulatory breakthrough, well, I think we need to have the legislation in place to achieve 55% emission reduction by 2030. So this is a must, and I think that's also a goal that has been supported by the heads of state and government in December. So we need to have the right legislation in place. Would this be a revolution or an evolution? I think what we are trying to do is to build on what we have. the energy side, I mean, to build on the clean energy package, which is currently being implemented in member states, and I think helps us to go already quite far in terms of decarbonizing our energy system. So what we are trying to do is look at the elements that need to be improved and that need to be complemented in conjunction with our colleagues in other services, trying to have a holistic approach to achieve net zero, but also to achieve a decarbonized and integrated energy system as outlined in the energy system integration strategy. So this is what we are trying to do, and hopefully we will be able to have the right legislation in place together with the Fit for 55 package mid this year, but also with the other elements coming by the end of the year, the hydrogen and gas decarbonisation package, which will also help to contribute to that vision, and also the energy performance of buildings directive that will be reviewed by the end of the year, and that will complement also the vision explained. So thanks a lot. I will leave it here for the moment.
Thank you so much, Antonio. I think that's a great start. You're setting the scene, and I think I understand that you're saying, well, we're moving into a very important, let's say, evolution of the regulation we have, that we have made some important results so far, but of course 2030 will be with the new targets challenging, so we will need to continue that pathway. And I think that with that, I would like now to move to our second panelist, Yves Verkamen. Your company is very active on infrastructure projects and investments to decarbonize gas and rethink the network of the future link, if you wish, to hydrogen. How do you react to these different scenarios, and are you aligned with those scenarios and the vision that your company has, for instance, in Belgium?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for this question. And yes, indeed, the way that we look at the energy transition is perfectly in line with the different scenarios. I think we all agree that scenarios give a potential pathway, and depending upon technological evolutions, cost evolutions, and so on, one or the other scenario will be happening. But basically, we should look at it as a kind of no regrets potential way to develop the path to carbon neutrality. As a company, I think what is important for us is to highlight the fact that, first of all, if we really want to reach carbon neutrality, we will have to have a big energy efficiency effort. We can't underestimate the importance of that. Also, the report is showing that we need to reduce by 40 or 45% our energy needs, which is, of course, I think, a challenge that we all will be facing, but it is going to be a necessary step to make this transition happening. And then with respect to the scenarios, what is clear that the complementarity between electrons and molecules are a given. And so the full electricity approach is having its limits, and we will be needing massive amounts of molecules to compensate, in fact, some of the potential issues we might be seeing with intermittent electricity production. Which molecules, again, is going to be depending upon technological and cost evolutions. Biomethane, for sure. It has a large potential. It has the advantage that it is, to some extent, a very sustainable way of making energy. It also has a negative CO2 emissions footprint if you take into consideration the use of, for instance, the feedstock and the manure, so to speak. So that's, I think, one pathway to really develop as much as possible, as also highlighted in the study. And then with respect to hydrogen, of course, hydrogen is going to be essential as well. And you've got two big types of hydrogen. We haven't mentioned it a lot. The green hydrogen based on renewable electricity, which of course is going to require a huge amount of electricity, green electricity as well. And also there, I think we should bear in mind that highly likely there might be at certain points in time, perhaps not enough green electricity to produce the green molecules that we are needing. And that's also the idea of importing needs to be considered. We might be importing over time green molecules from areas where there is abundantly available sun, where you then either through pipelines or overseas can transport hydrogen in the form of hydrogen or synthetic methane or any other form like methanol. So I think that's also very important to take away. We will be needing massive amounts of molecules. And then also it has been highlighted in the report, carbon capture is essential. Carbon capture is going to be a key element of Power to X. If we really want to move into a decarbonized world, we will be needing the CO2, and the CO2 needs to be coming from the industry, for instance, where it's also something to highlight. Some industries have CO2 as a fatal byproduct. So by changing the fuel, you're not going to sort out or solve the CO2 emissions of these industrial players. So you need also to find a way to capture that CO2 by immediately reusing it as much as possible. And then my last point is a very important point, and it was also very well highlighted in a study, is flexibility. We need to start living with the fact that our system is going to be much more complex in future than it is today. Hence, we need to take into account all kinds of solutions to cope with either the very short-term flexibility needs, and then of course you've got batteries and demand-side management and so on, but also the fact that during a couple of days, there might be not enough sun or wind available. What do we do during these periods? Just look at what happened at Texas. It's something that we don't want to see happening because the entire system failed to some extent. It wasn't linked to the renewables, it was linked to the overall system. So also we need to take into account how to deal with that. And then again, sector coupling is going to be key in that context. When there is low electricity prices, you would be able to make relatively cheap molecules that you can store, but also power to gas can contribute to the flexibility of the system by turning on or turning off, depending on the needs of the system as such. So I would leave it here, but happy to discuss further during the panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Yves. I think you are pointing out many elements from energy efficiency, the imports dimension, the importance of some technologies, and of course flexibility, which is core of this report. And I really invite all the people that are watching YouTube to go through the report and the different chapters, because there is a lot of material out there. I think this shows how complex sector coupling is and how many things can change, not only for the energy system, but also for the entire economy. Now, let me move to the next panelist, and representing now the electricity TSO, Pascal Funk. I think, you know, we talk a lot about the importance of electrification, and electrification, of course, we need to speed up to reach at least one of the, if you wish, the baseline scenario that the professor presented, if you want to hit the climate targets. Now, how do you react to these scenarios, and what is your company doing to support this process in the near future?
Thank you, Maximo, and thank you for the invitation to take part to this panel. How do we react to this study? First, we think that it is a very relevant topic, and this study comes really in due time, so it is very helpful to us. You know that as a group, Elia Group is committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. We are willing to make our processes more sustainable and completely climate neutral by 2040. And you know, as an example, that our daughter company, 50 Hertz, being active in Germany, has established a vision and the aim to get the electricity demand covered by renewables by 2032. So it is really an objective which is very close to our heart, and so we were happy to contribute to this study. Now, we believe that when thinking at carbon neutrality, we must really look at a cost-effective way in order to reach it. And so one very important element is, of course, energy efficiency, and we would also like to underline that. But in addition to that, also we see in the different scenarios direct electrification as one important point, and the usage of renewable energy sources. We think that these are the cost-effective measures in order to decarbonize. in addition to that, of course, the use of green molecules may be used in order in the sectors which are difficult to abate. Regarding the scenarios, first, we believe that investigating several scenarios is a good and robust approach in order to have a wide view on the different pathways and assumptions to that. What we can see, of course, is the central role of electricity, which has already been mentioned. It is, of course, important to us. In that respect, we believe that there are several technologies close to maturity in order to make it happen in quite, let's say, a short time window. Electric vehicles, also in the heating sector, we believe that things can be accelerated in order to deliver results. In relation to this, maybe a thinking on digitalization is also important, because it will help to better optimize the usage of these technologies to the benefit of consumers and also of industry. And then the final point is on the electricity grids, which will need to be strengthened in order to make it happen. This must be done onshore and offshore. And so these are the important points we take out of the study. On the policy recommendations, I think indeed that we must start from what is in place today, but obviously a lot of additions, or let's say improvements in the policies and regulations will need to happen in order to support the objectives being put in place. For example, to give a priority to direct electrification and the use of renewables. In order to improve that, thinking on energy taxation would be important in order to make sure that this priority is taking place. When we speak about speeding up the development of renewable energy sources, a lot of attention is being put on wind, and especially offshore wind projects. Thinking in the regulation about hybrid projects would also be helpful in order to support the development of these new designs for delivering offshore projects. Building up grids, it needs an acceleration of the permitting processes also, which would be important in the regulation, and also cross-border cooperation when we speak about cross-border connections between countries. And then on digitalization, which should also be taken up in the regulation in order to support the whole processes. So these are my reflections at this stage based on the study.
Thank you, Pascal, for enlarging and enriching the debate. You mentioned in digitalization, permitting, the consumer dimension, which we will come back later to that. So we see that this is really, really complex and really rich, and the combination of factors, of course, makes this interesting, but very complex. And I'd like to move on and ask Simone Mori along the line of electrification, because your company it's one of the largest utilities in the world, investing massively on renewables electricity. Now, could you share with us your thoughts about the findings of the different models and the different scenarios, and one particular question about which sectors you think we need to really speed up electrification, and we need really to increase the rates of electrification to reach 2050, and what do you think about the extreme net zero scenario? Is that feasible, or you take it more as a theoretical exercise that can bring us some ideas? Simone?
No, thank you very much, Maximo. Thank you very much for your work. Thank you very much, Bruno, for inviting me and taking part in this interesting discussion about the study. The study is very ambitious, and this may push us in trying to put together different solutions for different time scales. So this is what was already mentioned by previous speakers. When we look at what's going on in the decarbonization pattern, we believe, we are very much confident that 2050 the carbon neutrality may be achieved in Europe. But we are also very much confident that a part of the answer is already in the facts that are happening today around Europe. I mean, the renewable and electrification are a part of the market, are not part of, of scenario picture. You see renewables development as by far the cheapest way to produce energy all around the world. You see them not in the longer term, in mid-term scenario. You see them in the results of the tenders around Europe, record low prices, as an outcome of tenders. You see electrification of transport not in the picture or in the directive of the Commission, but in the listing of the car makers. So you go in a car, you want to buy your car, and you see that the cars presented to you basically are more and more electric cars. So I think this is a problem which has already been solved. There's not a matter of scenario. Of course, the scenario is the speed of evolution of this trend, which is critical, as has been just mentioned. And of course, I mean, the ability to have more efficient and effective permitting process is very critical in order to achieve the 2030 target, not 2050, just 2030 for renewables. And of course, the speed of adoption of electric mobility, you were mentioning the point of direct electrification, is a critical consequence of the evolution of the infrastructures and evolution of the technology of batteries. But I mean, maybe there is this is not a long-term scenario. We may discuss this break-even is going to be in 2023, 2024. It's very short-term, not long-term. So I would say all those together with the energy efficiency, which is an important part of the story, the massive, the incredible opportunity coming from the energy efficiency, especially in the residential segments in Europe, is a no regrets, short term, clearly present in the market issue. It's not a matter of, again, of long-term picture scenarios, but of how market is delivering. On the extreme scenario, of course, we look at the electrification as the main driver. The extreme scenario is very close to the scenario that we presented as Euroelectric. It was presented by McKinsey, so that was an external analysis, and we really believe that looking at the McKinsey abatement cost, which is a pretty relevant issue. I mean, we have to compare cost efficiency of the different scenarios. I think that we are pretty confident that the final outcome in 2050 will be not very far away from the electricity, the East scenario. So I also understand that we have to start now discussing this idea of the sector complement basically means how to put together electrons and molecules. I think in the study there are a lot of molecules. I just want to comment this because it seems to me a pretty much strange, or at the limit of the fantasy, the idea that we may run 122 gigawatt of CCS with biomass without any booming impact on how biomass sector could work. I mean, it's a number which is I think 5 times the most extreme scenario of the Commission. I think this is completely outlined. It's a kind of fantasy. And I'm saying that having worked quite a lot in the CCS application for power sectors. I'm not saying that CCS is not going to play a role. It may have a role in some specific application in the future. We don't have to be ideological at that. But going back to your question, I believe that direct electrification will play a major role. I think that your baseline scenario probably is quite ungenerous with the potentiality of direct electrification in transport. So the number for electric vehicles, I think, is smaller than what we expect. By far smaller than what we expect. I believe that the impact in terms of infrastructure development is much less critical what the study says. So that's we see the need of evolution of power infrastructure. You know, we are talking about 30 years, which is quite a lot of time. Basically, being just acceleration of the evolutive of the natural evolution of the enforcement of power network with a lot of digital, but digital is in some way is not a capital intensive step, and we see a good complement coming from molecules, especially for hard to abate sector, in order to complement battery in terms of long-term storage of this massive amount of renewable we will be for sure able to install. Thank you very much, Maximo.
Thank you so much, Simone, to make some very concrete statements and also to challenge part of the report, because this is about CERRE, right? We need to look into things, so we need to challenge. You talk about the great potential of electrification and that the net zero scenario is possible, and there are others saying that it's possible. This is very important, and to be, of course, to have a debate on that, and also about the technologies. Because our researchers are saying, okay, we need everything we have to make sure we reach net zero by 2050. And of course, there might be the case that some technologies will fit more or less. And this is part, of course, of the debate. But thank you, Simone, for those remarks. And I'd like also to give the floor to our last panelist, and then we will start the debate. Annegret, I think you are the last one, and you have heard a lot of ideas and reflections about this research, and I'm very curious to hear your vision and your view as a national regulator, of course, about the findings of the model, but also if you can put a bit some light on what could be the consumer perspective, when we talk about sector coupling and rapid decarbonization to reach net zero 2050. The floor is yours, Annegret.
Yes, thank you, Maximo, and thank you for the interesting study and debate we are about to have. And yes, let me say I agree with what Antonio said. Of course, the perspective of having energy system integration and even the wider economy system integration perspective is absolutely necessary to reach net zero. And of course, we call it whole in CERRE, but also in BNETS-A, we pursue this whole system approach here, which takes into account the interlinkages between the sectors and also the wider sectors, like what you integrated, transport and heating, for example. So I think, as also in the various recent strategies and communications of the European Commission, I think everybody agrees that this system integration, as it is now called, is key to reach the overarching objective of climate neutrality or net zero or decarbonization. However, I tend to agree with what the previous speaker said. Some of the assumptions and the modeling seem to be, let's say, not, or seem to be a bit inconsistent in the outcome and also in the modeling scenarios as such. In particular, as you mention or you address the consumer perspective, I think that is something that we would, of course, feed into the system. And we couldn't find where or how the flexibility coming, for example, from demand side perspective, from the consumers, from the users, how this is adequately fitted into the equation, so to speak. It has a very much, let's say, a technology and producer or operators perspective, but not taking on board all the actors. And we think that this is something that would require a little bit of recalibration, so to speak, to say the least. And with this, I come also to the fact that I think another point with which we fully agree as regulators, and I recently said this also in a Euroelectric event, that there is, with the increasing share of renewables, which is a key factor, of course, and the increasing integration that we all aim, that at the same time requires more flexibility. But in our perspective, it seems that some of these aspects of the flexibility are not 100% captured in the way it is modeled. And here I'm mentioning, it is nice to have a nice word like spatial flexibility, but I'm sorry, this is plain old investment in infrastructure. That's fine, and we certainly also, as I also said already, we need, of course, to restructure and to expand the grids to align them, in fact, with the more decentralized production, for example, and that's exactly. But also with reinforcing certain transmission lines overall, for example, to connect offshore wind. I mean, we are doing this in Germany since 10 years now. We try to do it, let's say, with our change of energy policy in 2011. I mean, we just had celebrated last week the 10 years of Fukushima, or celebrated in inverted commas, of course. So just to say, we are well aware of this, but we should not, let's say, call something flexibility, which is not flexibility. Spatial flexibility is a term that is an euphemism, I would say. And with this, it gets a bit inconsistent in terms of attributing something to flexibility, which in the end is looking at infrastructure investment without taking into account that potentially there's less infrastructure investment needed if you factor in new flexibility forms in the original sense of the word. So that's maybe something that I should clarify in terms of scenario calculation and the way we do this here. The following from this, of course, is also that we clearly would say as regulators, and I will point you to 2 papers recently published by CERRE, we don't think that this requires a, let's say, major breakthrough, or what I would rather call unwinding of the good regulatory principles that functioned well just last year in the crisis, but also overall and in general, and they were confirmed in the clean energy package. And that is that the grid needs to be regulated. There needs to be dynamic regulation. We absolutely agree with this. But for example, in Germany, we already have like incentive regulation to give the right incentives here for a efficient and cost-reflective rollout. Yeah, so I think that's nothing new. And exactly these ideas have also been confirmed with the clean energy package. And I very much favor the approach there to link back to the fundamentals, basically a market-driven approach of regulation, trying to get the price signals right where they had been potentially, let's say, distorted through subsidies or the like. So I think that is what the clean energy package is about. Exactly, already factoring in to reach, of course, not the new climate targets, but they exactly, of course, also had the intention to reach the 2030 targets and adjusted the system on the electricity side as is necessary there. So, which basically also means that it confirms the rules of unbundling and third-party access. And we as regulators are very much agreeing to this, in particular also because we see, and that is what we have just published in our white paper series of CERRE on regulation, future regulation of hydrogen and future regulation of power to gas, we see that these activities are market-based activities, and therefore this requires that the unbundling rules that operators should not own assets on power to gas or on hydrogen production assets should clearly stay separate, which requires unbundling rules. So there we see that what has been started with the clean energy package in, let's say, adjusting the regulation of the third energy internal market package to the necessity of factoring in climate targets more, and in particular also increasing share of renewables, etc., should be, I'm not using the word mirroring, but should be extended also on the gas side in the decarbonisation package to come, factoring in what was said already by the Commission in the various strategies that they have recently published, including the 10E regulation, draft regulation, where also some of these elements are rightly picked up. Let me close by saying that we also in these two papers agree that we have to take a look at the definitions so that they are consistent with each other, but we don't see that this is, let's say, changing everything or putting everything top down or upside down. Sorry. So we think what the clear message from our side is, yes, develop the regulatory framework where it is needed to ensure and to promote energy system integration, but don't change the fundamentals which worked well. Thank you.
Thank you, Annegret. And I think it's very interesting what you're saying, because this debate of we have the clean energy package, this is the basis we still need to implement, while we have a EU Green Deal and we need to come up with the new regulation, which will come, and how far we go. So you are giving here your view. I want to remind all the participants that Annegret plays a fundamental role at CERRE, representing all the national regulators in Brussels. Now, I would like to give another extra 10 minutes for the debate, because we were planning to start the second session and now, but we will extend a bit the time. So one of the first question I'm getting I think here in my mobile, it's about consumers, back to consumers. There are different actors asking, when we look at all the scenarios, some of the scenarios, we see that there might be a lot of investment needed, not only for electricity, but also on the other side. So a question for Antonio, if you are there, when you are forecasting, when you're looking the numbers, are you concerned about the who will pay for such an important investment? And I would like to ask the same question to Simone and also to Mr. Verkamen. Can I start, Antonio, can you reply to that question?
Yeah, thanks, Massimo. Indeed, I mean, consumers are at the very center of our reflections, at the very center of our modeling, and at the very center of our policies. We see the European Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package as a part of a wider growth strategy, and as part of the wider recovery efforts of the EU that will have a positive impact in the long run in consumers, in citizens, and in the society as a whole. If we look at the numbers, for example, and how the costs of renewable electricity production are going down in the last few years to become, under some conditions, the cheapest way to produce energy. So at the end of the day, this is a trend that it's important to continue. This is why we have also come up, one of the reasons why we have come up with the energy system integration strategy, because for us, it's not only about decarbonization as such for the sake of decarbonization. It's about doing it in a cost-effective way. And we are convinced that by implementing the energy system integration vision and agenda, we will be able to achieve the best possible results in terms of cost effectiveness, but also in terms of consumer participation and engagement in the energy transition, so that they can reap the benefits of the energy transition. Having said that, it's clear that there are some regions and some parts of citizens that are likely to be more affected by the energy transition. And that's why we have specific policies in place to target those groups, such as the just transition mechanism or specific energy poverty policies to target those groups at more vulnerable or at risks of energy poverty.
Thanks, Antonio. Simone, your reaction to this?
Oh, yes, I basically agree with what has been said. And it's also that, again, we have to take into consideration two factors. The first one is that clearly the change, any evolution goes to the movement and the decision of people, customers, citizens. And there's a revolution that needs a full engagement of citizens. And it's very wise, the kind of approach that the Commission gave in order to promote a very fast, a very quick decarbonization. Time is now. I mean, we may not waste the chance of the recovery resiliency plan. I mean, there is a huge amount of resources that have to be put into the table in order to do basically two things: to prepare the infrastructural evolution which is needed in order to deliver the short-term, mid-term steps. Basically, I'm thinking at the battery charging infrastructures, which is the clear constraints today. And number two, to start to prepare the technology for the day after tomorrow step, which is again tackling hard to abate sector. So, and I think that this is very important. We have to keep in mind cost efficiency, because at the end of the day, people, in order to be active and participating in this revolution, want to see a pattern which has to be efficient, has to have a relatively light impact on energy costs, and we believe that this might be done by reducing the energy costs. I mean, this is a study we carried out in 2030. This is a 2030 we carried out the study with an independent analysts, and it's clear that acceleration basically will reduce overall costs for European citizens. So in any case, it's also clear that what is needed now is to go deeper in the scenario about cost impact, about the merit order of this different technology solution. On the other hand, we have to find a way to have full engagement of people. Again, energy efficiency goes to people. I mean, when you decide that you want to refurbish your house, how you want to refurbish your house, which kind of technology you want to deploy in order to have a more advanced management of your energy needs. This goes to your personal spending, your personal buying decision. This is the same when you decide to buy an electric car instead of a diesel car. This is going to create problems during the transition. Yes, of course, we have in Europe, we have regions we are heavily relying on coal. And I think that again, the European Commission, the European Union is having a very sensitive approach when says that a part of the resources have to be focused in order to guarantee that the transition in this region has to be fast, relatively fast. Of course, this may not come overnight, but it has to be relatively fast, but it has to be as smooth as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. Yves, do you agree that we are well equipped to make such a big investments and still protect, let's say, low-income citizens or those regions that will struggle the most? How do you see that discussion?
In fact, we will have to. I don't think it's a secret that energy transition will cost money, and it's something we shouldn't hide, but we should make sure that this is not impacting the energy consumers as such, because otherwise the energy transition won't happen. I think that's a fair statement to have in mind. but what I think is very positive is the fact that the momentum is right now. You see people moving ahead, using subsidies or not subsidies, depending on the situation. I also subscribe what Antonio said. The Green Deal is an excellent instrument to start kicking this transition off. Billions are going to be invested in the necessary infrastructure, in the necessary technology to be able to deliver as quickly as possible these new forms of energy in the cheapest way. Because again, that should be the target. We should be making sure that this energy transition is done in the cheapest way, which means technology, which means infrastructure, which means integrated planning, which means looking forward, which means also starting with pilots, but with the ambition to scale them up, not just doing pilots for the sake of pilots, but really having the target to end up with a system that is being able to deliver it in the cheapest way. And I think that should be our main objective.
Thank you so much. There is also a quick question to our professor Kong related to cost efficiency. Could you tell us if in the different scenarios, but the variants you have created, net zero, ENG, are there massive indicators of, let's say, more or less cost efficient variants based on your modeling, or they are more or less in the same line? Because I think the message is clear from all the speakers. There will be costs. The consumers will need to find solutions for some type of consumers, because Europe is a complex demographics area. And what does the modeling say, your modeling say?
I think, first of all, the conceptual framework for the model is, it defines the least cost solution depending on the set of input assumptions. And obviously, we presented a baseline scenario with the best possible set of assumptions that we work on. And then, we'll obviously try to push our system, as I said before, towards one or the other extreme by, changing some of the cost assumption of basically, doubling or halving some of the costs of the key technologies that could, push the energy, the net zero energy system towards one or the other way. So we have a look at this, in particular, like explicit comparison, but just to say that, given the set of assumptions in each of the baseline scenarios, it always finds obviously the optimal solution in terms of the duration and investment, and therefore this is given those sort of assumptions, it's a least cost given all those assumptions.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, I need to close this session because we need to move on to the second one. I would like to thank you, each of you, for your participation and for your inputs. Of course, this is, I would say, the starting point of a long discussion, and that we will have this year, the next years. And I would like to pass the floor over to Bruno for the introduction of the second session. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maximo. Thank you, Simone, Antonio, Pascal, Yves, Annegret, for your contribution. I hope you can stay with us. But anyway, we move now to the second part, and it's clear that we cannot dissociate modeling results from the potential regulatory and policy frameworks to reach net zero. That's why I suggest we move to the second panel, which will address these. But before that, I'd like to ask my colleague, Professor Pollitt, to share with us in 15 minutes the gists of his 41 recommendations, which conclude this report. Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Bruno, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this this seminar. And let me once again thank both my colleagues at Cambridge, especially Kong, and my colleagues at CERRE for all their help with this project, and to thank our sponsors for all the inputs that they've given to the modelling. So I'm going to introduce what we've been thinking about in terms of recommendations. And we've got a large number of recommendations in our report, of which I'll give you a flavor, both of the context of the recommendations and some of the specific recommendations themselves. I think the thing I would want to emphasize, which picks up on some of the things that our speakers have already been saying, but perhaps we need to say it much more clearly. Net zero still remains a very unlikely outcome for the European economy by 2050, because it involves very ambitious achievement of targets which involve multiple technologies being rolled out at a scale that we have never seen them being rolled out before. And even for existing technologies that we know about, the continuing scale of the rollout remains wildly ambitious. And so it is important to say that. It's also important to say that our modeling is a modeling of how you decarbonize the current electricity and gas and energy system in Europe. If the economy, as we hope, continues to grow, then the scale of the decarbonization challenge will only increase. So important to say that as we model 2050, we're not saying this is likely. What we're saying is this is an internally consistent set of model results, which gives rise to, we hope, an internally consistent set of policy conclusions. We're not saying that they are easy to achieve, okay? And I think I would want to emphasize that. As we've already heard, renewable electricity is going to be central to a decarbonization of the European economy. We're going to need massively scaled up technologies that we've not really seen before, including, we think in our modeling, synthetic methane, synthetic fuels, from electricity, carbon capture and storage, and hydrogen. And just to emphasize again, in our modeling, we do run an extreme electrification scenario. That is not enough to get to net zero under current cost assumptions about the different technologies that are available, and current assumptions about the technological characteristics of electricity and the need for storage and the underlying variability of renewable electricity generation, which will be dominant by 2050. So it's important to say that an extreme electrification scenario isn't going to be enough to get us to net zero. And that's one of the things that our modeling reveals, and hence that there are all these other technologies whose scale up is absolutely essential to the achievement of net zero. And one of the ways in which we illustrate that is we do run this 90% decarbonization scenario, which is already very ambitious, already contains a lot of electrification, particularly of light duty transport. And we see the difference that moving to 100% decarbonization actually makes. And that's where things like massive scaling up of CCS and the development of hydrogen become very important if you want to get to net zero, because these hard to decarbonize sectors, particularly in transport and heavy duty industry, become important. In our modeling, which is based on the inputs that we had from our stakeholder group, we see that we continue to use methane in the existing methane network, but that methane is going to be zero carbon methane. We also show in our modeling that fossil fuel prices continue to make a difference to what sort of outcomes you might see. If fossil fuel methane was actually cheap, that would lead you to produce hydrogen from methane by cracking the methane and capturing the CO2. If as we hope that the green electricity continues to get much cheaper, then you would see the methane, the hydrogen that we do use coming from renewables. So fossil fuels do make a difference to what sort of energy system you see emerging as the least cost energy system. The other things that we emphasize is the need to scale up existing and new technologies, and getting the successful scale up of some of these new technologies, as Kong emphasized, particularly hydrogen and technologies around biomethane, and the continuing scale up of both wind and solar, and the wind scale up still being very, very ambitious to meet our net zero targets. And of course, when we make policy recommendations, we need to start from where we are now. One of the things I think that became clear from our modeling is that if you want to get to net zero, and hydrogen emerges as being important and zero carbon methane remains significant on the system, what we envisage is that you would have two separate systems to deliver that, because the methane network would continue to be supplying many households, for instance, and smaller commercial customers, whereas the hydrogen network that you would build from scratch would be supplying heavy duty customers and producing hydrogen to be used in transport. And I suppose the other thing that we want to highlight is what we model is 2050. We don't model the pathway to 2050. And of course, the pathway of how we get to a net zero economy is going to be at least as difficult to map out as the 2050 outcome itself. Okay, so that's just by way of background. Now let me give you a flavor of some of our recommendations about policy. And I think we've heard some of these things echoed already, but it's important to emphasize them again. The European Union has an ambitious set of policies already in place, and those need to be continued and strengthened. It's important that we extend the existing pricing of carbon, the existing single electricity market, the existing single gas network, and that we continue to work on how we price and value flexibility within the system. We continue to support the massive rollout of renewable electricity. Those are existing policies which all need to be continued. And we need to continue to support energy efficiency. Energy efficiency remains, in theory, by far the cheapest policy. And we need to continue to work hard, even to stay where we are in terms of energy consumption. Electricity is key. Electricity does well in any net zero scenario. And if it's cheaper to produce renewables, it will do better. We envisage a big increase in cross-border trading of electricity. So by contrast, we see cross-border trading of methane going down because people will be producing their methane and indeed their hydrogen locally in what we model. But electricity will be heavily traded across European borders, and increasing cross-border trading capacity would seem to be important. We do raise issues about the organization of the gas system and about electricity and gas integration and about pricing of the gas network. One of the really difficult issues in net zero is going to be energy demand will be suppressed. But we're going to have these multiple new investments, more energy vectors, lower volumes, and how we recover the fixed costs of the energy system and to whom they are allocated is going to be extremely important and raise very, very difficult cost allocation questions. And we suggest that actual integration of electricity and gas ownership may be very helpful in sharing cost allocation and apportioning costs out to customers. But there are certainly big issues in terms of coordinating the gas system. There's clearly work to be done by the Commission on the definition of gases. What constitutes a green gas, a blue gas, and a grey gas, and of course trying to spot anybody who is trying to play with the definitions, because people are going to be injecting all sorts of gas into their network, as we envisage, and it is important that these gases are well defined so that we can have genuine single markets in them. And we'll also need to regulate both methane and hydrogen storage, and those raise conventional questions about how we price storage, particularly network costs with respect to storage. Hydrogen, appears to be important in net zero because we do need a heavy duty fuel, particularly in transport, but also in industry. And hydrogen has the advantage that you can get it either from a green source or from cracking conventional methane with CCS. And that having hydrogen raises issues about how you finance the hydrogen network and what the initial uses of hydrogen might be. Watching developments in specific countries might be very important. We heard some mention of this. Europe already benefits substantially from the global market in energy, and it would be very helpful for Europe if a global hydrogen market did emerge and we could get cheap sources of hydrogen from some of the countries that have got hydrogen strategies and where there might be cheap either green or blue hydrogen available. And we should watch and encourage developments in those countries closely. What can the EU be doing in the nearer term? And we've heard, that the Union is interested in doing some of these things. Clearly, a plan is necessary for the joint decarbonisation of electricity and gas sectors. One of the great standout successes of the last 20 years has been the renewable energy policy of the EU, much to everyone's surprise, okay, and certainly to my surprise. And it would seem to be the case that if we really were serious about a net zero, and we think that hydrogen or biomethane is going to be really significant in net zero, we need similar targets to drive those gases initially. And so renewable gas targets would seem to be a sensible first step to doing that. Zero carbon transport is important in all of our scenarios. EVs are just a given that we need to roll out EVs. They're not going to be enough, but they are an important step. And promotion of zero carbon transport, both for light duty and also heavy duty, remains absolutely essential to achieving net zero. And encouraging the continuing expansion of cross-border infrastructure in order to encourage the promotion of really high levels of renewable electricity. We saw in our central net zero scenario, we've got 81% of variable renewable electricity. That is going to require a lot of interconnection and sharing of electricity assets across Europe. And I mean, it's a legitimate concern. People say to me, well, hydrogen, isn't it just an excuse for current methane producers to say, we'll give you the hydrogen, but we want to use methane, and then say, well, the CCS is too expensive. Why don't we'll just end up with using the methane, but turning it into hydrogen and still releasing the CO2. Clearly, we've got to stop that happening, and the Union needs to make sure that doesn't happen as we develop hydrogen. So where do we go from, sort of right now? We do need to scale this up, and we need to prove that it works at scale. So large scale innovation around sector coupling, joint integration of electricity and gas, these new technologies that we envisage becoming very significant. This needs to happen very soon in order for 2050 to still be on track. That doesn't mean that we won't see some variation in member state policy, or that we shouldn't see some variation. We've modeled what should happen across the 28 countries of the EU plus the UK. But that doesn't mean that individual countries couldn't decide they're just going to have hydrogen and not be at biomethane. The point is, it doesn't really add up at the whole European level, according to our modelling. But some variation at the individual state level might well be possible, and indeed is to be encouraged if it promotes the overall achievement of net zero. And we need to do more to encourage gas transmission and distribution system operators to get involved in the transition to net zero consistent gas. And in the near term, we've already heard mention of revisions to the European emissions trading system, which we very much support, and have another CERRE report where we back the extension of the EU ETS to transport and heating. That needs to happen, as does more coordination of energy taxation across Europe in order to not distort the choices between fuels across electricity and gas. And as we've heard mention already, the COVID-19 recovery package could be used strategically in order to promote net zero. And there's more to be done in terms of understanding the citizens' willingness to accept government intervention and to accept behavioral change, which we've seen demonstrated on a huge scale in response to COVID. And we know that our younger citizens are really committed to net zero. And we know they've had a really rough ride in COVID, and we have an obligation to make this happen and to think seriously about how European policy can promote this, and quite frankly, how older citizens can pay for this in order to create the cleaner environment that our younger citizens really want. So thank you for listening, and I do encourage you to read our 173-page report, which took us a year and which includes an incredible amount of detail and inputs from our stakeholders, and I look forward to hearing the debate.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think that's much more than food for thoughts. This is the source of a lot of ideas, proposals, and this is what we are planning to do with our panel now. So let me introduce a very distinguished panelists. We have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Morten Pedersen, member of the European Parliament and Vice Chair of the ITRE Committee. We have Francesco Del Pizzo, Head of Grid Development and Strategies and Dispatching at Terna, the Italian Electricity TSO. Camilla Palladino, Executive Vice President, Strategy and Investor Relations at SNAM, Italian Gas TSO. Welcome, Camilla. We also have Massimo Ricci, Head of Energy Division at CERRE, the Italian regulator. And of course, last but not least, Catherine Levoux-Proust, you will excuse my French, Chief Strategy Officer at GRDF, French Gas TSO. Welcome all of you. So let's start with Vice Chair Peterson. The European Parliament, and more particularly your committee, will play a fundamental role in the so-called Fit for 55 package. From your perspective, which recommendations presented in the CERRE report are the most relevant to secure that this Fit for 55 will help to decarbonize the economy towards 2050? And of course, we have seen some of your comments in the first session. Do you see challenges for some policies that can affect the citizens and consumers?
Well, thank you so much. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to this great debate. And I want to congratulate Professor Pollitt on this study. I think that the issue of sector coupling and sector integration is absolutely key if we are to fulfill our ambitions and get to where we want to get in terms of climate objectives. So I think this is such an important topic and so difficult because politically speaking, everybody wants to do this. I mean, who would oppose sector integration, sector coupling? Nobody with the right mind would ever do so. But the devil is obviously in the detail, and it is so bloody difficult to do. I'll say a few more words on this, but just first to touch upon some of the issues that Professor Pollitt concluded with or ran through in his presentation. And I took note of the issues mentioned, because they are all in one form or another form on the table in terms of legislation right now, or will be very, very soon. And overall speaking, the year of 2021 we will see a tsunami of legislation on the table, coming out from the Commission, landing on the table in the ITRE committee or in European Parliament at large. And my worry from a sector coupling perspective is, politically speaking, do we get it right in terms of ensuring that we have the right holistic approach or systemic approach to all these exciting issues? And this is absolutely key and extremely important to do, again, if we are to get it right, this issue of sector coupling and integration. Right now, personally, I have the pleasure of being a rapporteur on the offshore renewable strategy, and we're starting to draft our proposal. And at the end of the day, the issue of offshore renewables is very much an issue of sector coupling, of integrating electricity into whatever, be it hydrogen or power to X or cross-border for that matter. So that is very much on top of my mind. I think we have to also address, to a certain extent, all the issues related to heat. I mean, we have excess heat being utilized, or should be utilized also, and factored in when talking about hydrogen or power to X, in order to ensure efficiency and efficiency first principles and all these dogmas, so to speak. I take note of what Professor Pollitt is saying, that electrification in the study is not enough. An extreme electrification scenario is not even enough in order to fulfill our objectives, but for sure we have to strive for it. I think there's broad acknowledgement, politically speaking, as to the importance of electrification and ensuring that we electrify to the furthest extent. As you know, we have a very, very big hydrogen discussion. You would have critics out there saying that, is this hype or is this real? I think it's fair to say that hydrogen is attracting a lot of attention right now, but everybody is quizzing whether the demand side is there, whether demand is sufficient in order to drive this extremely important development. I think some of the issues that were mentioned on the ETS, we'll see soon a major discussion on this, and everybody knows how difficult it is to reform the ETS, because you'll have all sectors and stakeholders out there complaining about the stability reserve and their need for maintaining free quotas. So if we have to see an increase in the quotas, in the prices, which I believe we have to see, I mean, it's moving upwards, but it has to go further up in order to reflect a real and true price on polluting. But we know that there will be stakeholders out there, and strong stakeholders, objecting to this and trying to maintain whatever kind of privileges they might have had previously. So that will also be a very big discussion for sure. I took note also of the point of increasing cross-border capacity in terms of transmission infrastructure. We just completed the Connecting Europe facility negotiations on also reflecting this, or to a certain extent trying to address this. But may I add to this that one thing is to increase cross-border capacity, but we also have to ensure that we utilize the existing cross-border capacity to the furthest extent, which obviously bears back to the reform we did of the electricity market regulation in the previous mandate, and the 70% ambitions in terms of cross-border trading. So I think ACER has a role to play in this, ensuring that we also do cross-border trading, and that we also, apart from investing in new capacity, also ensure that we use the already existing capacity to the furthest extent. Because again, when you consider ASA's market reports, for sure, it's very clearly illustrated that we do not utilize the already existing infrastructure to the extent that we ought to. We do not have an internal market. We do not have real seamless flowing cross-border trading in electricity as of today. We could go much further in this, and we have to ensure that we have the political and regulatory tools in our arsenal in order to ensure that we do so. Why? Well, mainly and basically in order to integrate renewables further in our electricity grids and thereby in our energy system. So all this to say, by the way, we're also going to revise the 10E regulation shortly. And for sure, this has to take into account all these exciting possibilities in sector coupling and system integration. So when Professor Pollitt mentions all the hydrogen discussions and infrastructural dimensions and perspectives in this, for sure this has obviously relevance in terms of the 10E regulation and the subsequent discussions on projects of common interest and all these electricity and gas discussions. So, and let me just wrap it up
yes,
now. Sorry for being long, but it is so exciting. I think politically speaking, our big challenge from the European Parliament side will be to get an overview of all the existing pieces of legislation that we will see in 21. And bear in mind that the Green Deal, I believe it's like 50 acts of legislation or so. It's gigantic. It's so ambitious and it's so great and exciting. And if we do this right, Europe will be the only continent in the world having such a broad and critical mass of regulation in this important area. And I think that is a great vision and perspective. And it's going to be so difficult ensuring that we get coherent legislation and thereby obviously facilitating system integration and sector coupling. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the discussion. Thank you. Sorry for being long.
Thank you, Vice Chair. No, I think it was great because it's very inspiring. And despite the thousands of pages of regulation and discussions you will have, that's your job. You seem to be pretty optimistic, and you see also the advantages to have Europe leading and be the front runner. Of course, you will have a huge agenda, and I'm sure that the next panelists might help us to think all the proposals that Michael put on these slides. So let me move now to Francesco Del Pizzo. Francesco, your company is also investing massively in Italy to modernize the network and prepare the country for further electrification, and not only at the national level, but also, of course, connecting to other countries. So from your perspective, what are the must-have policies and regulation to secure that development and help to decarbonize the European economy?
Thank you very much for the invitation to this meeting. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some ideas about our sector and the challenges for the future. First of all, in general, we very much agree upon the results of this study that, of course, as Mr. Pollitt says, is based upon the objective to net zero, not on the how reasonable is the objective or if it's efficient such objective. But in general, we agree upon the direction that is much more important when we look at the crystal ball scenario, some things that is in 30 years, where many things can happen. What is most important at this stage is to understand if the direction is right. And we completely agree upon the fact that this is the right direction. And the main decisions are completely agreeable. So the scenario that we have to challenge is a scenario where the power is generated mainly by renewables. Then we can discuss about the level of transformation to gas or something else, but in general, we agree upon the fact that in the 30 years, the 80% of the energy overall will be generated by power, and of which 80% will be renewable. So in this scenario, I think that we have several challenges. From the technical perspective, a system that is working with almost full renewable is completely different of the one where we have a traditional generation that is providing a service of regulation to the grid and the security services. So in this in this scenario, we definitely need to invest as Europe, not only as only Italy or other country, because we have completely interconnected grids. So the security of Italy is dependent on the security of the country, and vice versa. So we need to develop a strategy that allow the TSO to operate in a grid where the capability of the plants are completely different. So the voltage regulation need to be completely provided by the grid by itself, because no one else can regulate. Second, the security services, the reserve and the storage capacity and all the other services need to be sized more at the European level rather than at the single country level. Because as far as we will move as a single country, of course, every single country needs face the challenges of the security of the grid, of the minimum capacity, for the regulation of the margin of production that will be a suboptimal. So Italy we will get a capacity solution for itself. The France will do the same. The Germany will do the same. At the end of the story, if we want to be efficient as a community, as a continent, we need to invest in a system that is creating a direction in the market where the capacity can be shared abroad the countries. And according to the level of connection that we have today and that we are developing in the power system, we definitely can have we can introduce an efficiency in the system as far as we will be able to share resources upon the countries rather than build up by ourselves all the capacity needed for the needs of every single one. So this is the first point. We need to invest for non-traditionally technology to regulate the grid, and the second, we need to share resources upon the countries in order to have an efficient system. At the same time, the challenges is what is the structure of this market, because this market will be completely different from the fundamental compared with the actual one. Today, we are working in a market that is driven by variable cost of production. As far as we will produce 80% of our energy by renewable, will be driven by the efficiency of capital and the abundance of the resources, so wind and the solar. Because at the end of the story, we will pay the capital invested by the renewable investors. So this kind of market have fundamental that are completely different as of today. So a market that is completely spot, that is, I would say, coupled upon the concept that the variable cost will define the cost, probably is not completely aligned with the underlying assets. So what is the market of the future? Definitely a market that reduces the risk for the investors, because the efficiency will be related to the payout of the capital. And as far as we will have a policy that allows the reduction of the risk for the investors, the cost of the energy will be less. It's a quite easy question, but as far as we will give a merchant risk and other risk to the grid, to the investor in renewable, more the capital investor should be paid off, and more the cost of the energy will be high. And it will be a problem for the development of the investment by itself. So today we have the opportunity to plan long term, and during the planning of long term, we need to understand that as far as we will build an efficiency market that reduces the risk for the investors, more we will get in terms of efficiency and reduction of the cost of the energy for everyone. The other element that I really appreciate the comments related to the infrastructure required also for the gas sector, and definitely if we want to invest in and to complete the footprints of net zero, we need to invest, of course, in hydrogen and other technology that are related more to the gas. At the same time, so we need to understand what is the infrastructure more efficient, because everything will be paid by people. So what is the most efficient solution for in this scenario? It is a scenario where we transport the power with the power grid, and then we distribute it with the distribution gas, or it is something that also at the transport level needs a gas infrastructure and hydrogen ready? This is a question. I don't know the answer, but definitely by policy, and definitely we need to plan as a whole. We cannot invest any longer thinking the power sector separated by the others. We need the policy and the alignment of the scenario also in the infrastructure level to understand if what is the mix of infrastructure that are required. That's it. There is a space for everyone, and there's a big opportunity also for investment and GDP growth and employment and for everyone. And the important thing is that it make an opportunity to make it efficient. Otherwise, someone will pay the bill at the end of the story.
Thank you, Francesco. Sorry if I interrupt.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I think it's interesting when you highlight, how we envisage the market of the future and how we make it happen, considering and bearing in mind who will pay for this transformation. So we're talking about an infrastructure, let's say, gain to planning the future. We're talking about the interconnection of two systems that are not necessarily connected. And I think this is perfect to ask a question to our next panelist, which is Camila Palladino, representing SNAM, because your company, Camila, is looking very closely into hydrogen and try, I think it was mentioned, the possibility to create a hub in Italy on hydrogen, connecting with other markets. Could you explain now your perspective of a large gas infrastructure group, one of the biggest, and how important is regulation to exploit the technologies you see that will help to decarbonize the economy? And how does the report help you to get into this thinking, as Francesco said, what is the most efficient way to get there?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. So this is a very interesting study, and we have long been supporters of the hydrogen opportunity, the green gas opportunity, and we think that this emerges very clearly in the study. It was a 33% share of green gases in the modelling, and we feel that this represents this shows that getting to net zero without a strong green gas presence is probably not possible, and that accelerating them saves you money on the way there. We also think that it's very interesting, as Francesco was saying, that there's a recognition of the role of networks, of infrastructure, both gas and electricity, in getting us to net zero. And in particular, we appreciate the value that the gas grid is awarded, especially in a system where there are large-scale renewables that are cheaper in parts of Europe or even imports. And indeed, in terms of areas of further development of the study or further iterations of the model, we think it would be interesting to try and differentiate the cost of renewables in different areas and to posit the emergence of large-scale resource-rich areas, both inside and outside Europe. Meanwhile, we also see in our modelling the emergence of complementary hydrogen and methane networks in Europe. We don't think blending is a forever solution, but it may be an intermediate solution. And we would like to highlight here, as we have done in the past, that the hydrogen network can be repurposed out of the existing gas infrastructure. And so SNAM said before that 70% of its pipelines are already hydrogen ready, and that would be that gives you an idea of how the evolution might occur. In terms of the policy recommendations, I think we would support the need to continue to incentivize renewables. We would posit large-scale renewables in Europe's best areas, or securing imports. I think the need to ensure that cost and regulation are in place to allow the massive scale-up of hydrogen, biomethane, and CCS. I heard Michael talking about possibly renewable gas targets, and you know, we've been thinking about that as well, and we think that would be a useful way to try and get these green gases off the ground. There are very interesting points in the study about large-scale power-to-gas facilities and how, you know, those necessary to couple the gas and electricity networks, and how the planning as to where these would be located might occur, and whether they would need to be regulated, what role the TSOs might play. We think this is a very interesting debate because obviously electrolyzers will serve a purpose there in terms of connecting the grids. And in general, we welcome and agree with the concept about closer coordination and planning between the gas and electricity TSOs. As Francesco was saying, the efficiency of the overall solution is very important to figure out, you know, that there's going to be a cost to this, and it will be borne by the consumer, presumably, and the way you evolve these networks to make them as efficient as possible is something that we need to figure out together. Turner and SNAM work together on joint scenarios already, so this is we're used to working together and are starting to work together more closely. And just a broad point on the cost recovery and you know, who pays for the whole thing, which, you know, is touched upon in the report and is a very interesting concept. And I think we would agree with the idea that it's important that the pricing allows the value of the system to, like, the value to the system of the different options to emerge. So clearly this will be an area that we'll need working on. That's it for me.
Thank you, Camila. I think in a way you complement a bit what Francesco said, and it's also very interesting to see that your companies are also thinking about the future together, and looking at, of course, the challenges, and looking at the cost recovery, looking at infrastructure, location, and I think this is very important. It's an important message also to our decision makers in Europe. With that, I think I'd like now to move to Massimo Ricci, representing the Italian national regulator, also part in contributing to this research. Massimo, I think we have heard quite a lot of comments about the consumers, and also in the previous session, there were some highlights about that and the importance to make the EU Green Deal, if we wish, still acceptable for all different consumers in Europe. But could you tell us, from the national regulator perspective, your perspective about the let's say the top proposals by Michael and team, and those that you might be concerned or you have some reservations, and explain why from a national regulator perspective. Massimo.
Yes, and thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to this very interesting debate so far, but I'm sure also for the rest of it. First of all, this kind of studies in these phases where we are trying to figure out how the system will be in 20 to 30 years from now. So I think it's very, very important to make a lot of study, even many more than we are really making at the European level, because too often we see that we take some scenarios and some results as given, instead of being results of hydrogen we will have, and I think this should be results of optimizing the system in a future perspective, without putting too many constraints in the optimization process. And this is something that you sometimes you see in trying to make simulations. So this kind of studies are very welcome from my perspective. from our perspective. One point I wanted to underline, there was a reference before about the costs for the consumers of this process, decarbonization process, net zero to 2050. What we are experiencing in Italy is that this is very important to understand. And one question we are trying to ask ourselves is there important and can also the general taxation policy be used to this respect? Because we think it's really very difficult, to manage tariffs, network tariffs, in order to cover all these kind of costs without big distortions. We are seeing already, I think, in Italy, but in Germany as well, I think, big distortion due to the fact that we put 40 to 50 euro per megawatt hour to finance renewable sources into the, the variable cost of electricity for consumers, which is a big distorted incentive for self-consumption, for example. And the more we go on in this route, the more I think it's important to ask these kind of questions. We are asking ourselves the question in Italy in order to see. We had some contribution from taxation policy during the COVID period, and that was given to specific destinations, specific customers in order to overcome the 3 months, the most relevant 3 months of the COVID period. But I think we should ask this question in general, also because the taxation policies are much more flexible in determining which kind of customers has to pay for what, and maybe to care about poverty and everything in a much more flexible way than power and gas tariffs can really achieve. So I think this is a very important question relevant to all the policy we are discussing about. Then about a bit about hydrogen. I think we everybody agrees on the fact that the renewables comes from electricity in a way. So what we are trying to do with decarbonized gas is to try to find other uses or decarbonize other sectors which are not which cannot be decarbonized through electricity. So the importance of gases are there. Gases, decarbonized gases importance is linked to the fact that it's a kind of an habilitation for power sources or renewable sources to get to consumption that it's not easily decarbonizable in other ways. So when we speak about colors of hydrogen, I think it's very important that the best color, the green one maybe, is kind of thought about with respect to the potentials of hydrogen to habilitate other kinds of consumptions. So the hydrogen should really come in hours where the power sector is already fully decarbonized. So I think it's a very important discussion because that's kind of an incentives which will be there for green or green hydrogen maybe, and it's very important that it will be there with giving the real sense of the potentials of green gases to the system. Otherwise, it's very difficult. I think Annegret already summarized very well the position of European regulator about unbundling, which is a very important part of the regulation today and will be also in the future. We think there is a big room for competition in also decarbonizing the sector. So we think it's very important to maintain the concepts of unbundling even in the future. Some last words about the studies where I started from. You said before you gave a look to the 2050 picture. I think in the future for developing studies, I think it's very, very important also to understand how we get there, because as the recent past is showing us, the cost of the overall cost of reaching decarbonization will highly depend on how we get there. We have seen in Italy, for example, in Europe, I think in the last 10 years in which we run in investing in renewables, and we are now paying 3 or 4 times the cost we will pay now to make the same investments. And now just means 3-4 years after where we really made the investment. And it's true that the decreasing cost is also thanks to the fact that we invested there, but I think there should have been in a way in having a more efficient path. So that's the first point. And the second point, it's very important to understand what to do in the near future, because technology is changing very fast. Cost of technologies is changing very fast. So it's very important to have a picture at 2050, but I think it's also very important to understand from where to start. I think decarbonization policies should be very flexible in themselves in order to adapt. So we don't need to understand now to start investing now in what we need in 2050, but we need to start investing now in what we need to get there. And that's a much more complex question than so it's room for a lot of studies that I think they are really very, very important to understand.
Thank you, Massimo. Sorry to interrupt because we are lacking a bit of time, but I think it's very interesting because you touch upon tariffs and you touch upon about taxation and also at the European level and the whole dimension of consumers and technologies, which of course enriches this debate. And with that, I like to give the floor to our last panelist, Catherine. I think your company is obviously very proactive in investing a lot, especially in some particular cities and regions. And I would like to hear your perspective about, of course, the proposals that Michael made, but also a question for you is, do you think that sector coupling at the end is the way to go for the entire continent, or you think that it will be applied more to particular regions and sectors and let's say locations? It's a more locational thing. The floor is yours, Catherine.
Okay, good morning all, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you. First, JRDF would like to thank very warmly and congratulate the CERRE and all the academic research work that has been provided. It's impressive, and it's very impressive because it's a very new intellectual approach. And my first point would be to say that according to JRDF, one of the main findings of the study is, and one main recommendation would be to have a close look at its intellectual approach, and that should inspire many energy policymakers, because it tackles the issue of energy with 4 main new steps and ways. First of all, it provides several scenarios in an open-minded way with a mixed technological complementary approach. There's no bias, there's no monolithic approach, and that's quite very new and should inspire many policymakers. And it also considers many different parameters, not only the carbon challenge, but also supply security and cost. And that's a very, very, very important new way of setting up new energy scenario. So thank you for this all this work that should be, and the first recommendation lies on this new intellectual approach that should be considered very closely by many policymakers. In all the recommendation, we want also to highlight the importance given to the flexibility approach. We think that flexibility solutions are very necessary to meet the objective of energy system integration, and also the different flexibility options provided by the gas vector, and in terms of power to gas, methanation, or hybrid heat pumps. And I wanted to share our agreement with many of the recommendations of this study. that lies in the focus on efficiency in the gas sector that should be promoted with the installation of hybrid heat pumps. So that's a key finding, and we really share it. The other finding is that we also agree that all the production of renewable gases should be scaled up, of biomethane, hydrogen, and synthetic methane. And we think also that it should be accelerated, and we promote with other European gas distributors the setup of a European Union-wide target for renewable gases. It would be a way to encourage the development of renewable gas. The third point I'd like to highlight, and that matter a lot, is that the study, compared to many others, is providing network costs at the distribution and transmission levels, including electricity network cost. And I think this is a great milestone that should set further debates on how to calculate and how to reduce energy networks costs for the benefits of all the collectivity. And that's very new. I think it's very rare in many studies to have such a deep analysis of the real overall cost of different options. And that's very, very important. And the fourth point I wanted to highlight, and that should inspire many works on energy policy makers, is important to assess and valorize the value provided by services of flexibility from the gas network to the electric one. And I think to be able to value flexibility and many different energy options should be very important at local or overall level. So regarding your question, according to sector coupling, we think that it's a key leverage approach to the global energy answer to net zero carbon emission. We think that sector coupling should be recognized on a general overall level, on a European one, that should be declined very according to all the specificity of the different geographical areas. So we promote different regulation policy recommendation, and one is effectively to support sector integration and by revising the 10 regulation directive.
Thank you, Catherine. I don't know if you can hear us or just you got frozen, but I will continue now. Thank you for your reflections, and we still have some time, a very few minutes for the debate. And one of the questions I can see in the system, and I like to ask our member of the European Parliament participating, is that on the one hand, we say sector coupling is something that we can build up, and we have the clean energy package and we need to adapt it. The Commission said the same this morning. The question then is, we see some member states taking the lead on some of the technologies, in some of the policies. If you take hydrogen, you see a lot of member states trying to take the lead. Is that normal, or do you see that as a challenge for the European Commission, Parliament, and institutions to make sure that on-runners and those followers won't, to some extent, have issues at the moment of implementing that?
Sure. I mean, this can be a challenge, but on the other hand, I also think that it is important, given the sensitivities of energy policy and the political sensitivity in member states, that you also have dynamics of countries or regions leading by example, and so I would also be somewhat worried with a one-size-fits-all approach to some of these issues, because for obvious reasons you have widely differing preconditions as to what kind of energy mix would a given member state have, what would be local opportunities or best practices in terms of sector coupling, and this will obviously vary widely all across Europe, depending on where you are and what your preconditions are. So I think we should be ambitious. I think we should push, but I think there also has to be some room for member states to sort of find out what will be the best solutions. What we cannot have is for nothing to happen. So I think we should put it or spin it the positive way around, saying that yes, we can and should be inspired by leading countries or regions or what have you, and then leave some room, but do not leave room for inaction, because we simply do not have time for this. Again, if we are to fulfill our general climate objectives, sector coupling is absolutely necessary. So in that regard, I would push member states to do the right thing, but what is exactly the right thing would obviously vary depending on local conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very refreshing. We will need to close now, but maybe I give the last 20 seconds to each panelist to answer this question. Do you think that the EU will develop sector coupling regulation, and thanks to that will lead in COP26 or future COP meetings? Do you think that's feasible? Yes or no? So let's start with Catherine.
Sorry, yes, of course, I think it's feasible. And I think that first, sector coupling is an intellectual framework and a different way of thinking about the energy system. And I think this is a general framework, intellectual approach that should be declined country per country to be suitable for each geographical area, but I think it's feasible.
Thank you. And Massimo.
Yeah, sorry, but I didn't hear very well when you were asking the question, but I agree with the first answer. So I think I get it afterwards. Sorry.
Camila, your answer.
Yes, of course, I think it's feasible. I think it's already starting to happen, both with the discussions that there are about renewable gas targets to enable the growth of green gases, and also to the debate that's ongoing about ways to stimulate the joint planning and the coordination between the different energy sectors. So of course, I think it's doable.
Francesco?
Yeah, it's challenging, but it's feasible. At the same time, we need to harmonize the all the regulation that we have at the moment. So the real challenge is not to get any brand new regulation for the coupling, but the objective to make an harmonization between what we have today. And this is very, very challenging compared with where we are today. So yes, but.
Yes, but thank you. And maybe Michael, your last concluding remark after hearing this, and then I'll pass over to Bruno.
Well, thank you. Just to say thank you very much to everyone who's contributed this morning. And I think technically likely that we could meet net zero. Yes. Do I think it's politically likely? I still think no. I think we want to emphasize that this is incredibly challenging, and the time is very short. And I suppose the one thing we would emphasize from our modeling is we all, in a sense, need to be in this together. We can't start ruling out one another's technologies, because if we start doing that, that potentially jeopardizes net zero. And I think that's one of the clear conclusions of our modeling. But thank you again to everybody.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all. Thank
you very much to all. It's interesting. Your last statement is interesting, Michael. We're friends, we're colleagues. We don't necessarily need to agree on political developments. I must say that I'm more optimistic. I want to be so. I think this is the concept, and Catherine Leboul has underlined that sector coupling is clearly an intellectual concept, but I think this is something which is bound to become a reality, and it will lead to profound changes. Where I can agree with you, Michael, is that it certainly will take decades to be achieved. And I think that your report and this morning's discussion have underlined that the key questions will be precisely about who will support the transformation and how they will do. So if I could, I would like, perhaps if I can, just share 5 short comments on that. First of all, clearly, and there I think you underlined in your report and with Kong's, the net zero remains an extremely technologically challenging policy goal. And it's challenging because it involves precisely the rollout of multiple new technologies at scale. And we're talking very specifically about RESE, biomethane, hydrogen, and CCS. And I think you make a strong case in your report when you demonstrate with your net zero scenarios that unless an unforeseen technological breakthrough appears in the near future, failure on behalf of the political decision makers, failure to scale up any one of these key technologies will simply block the path to the achievement of the EU objective of full decarbonization by 2050. The second point is that while decarbonization is clearly the most important driver of the fundamental transformation of the energy system, which should be planned for, we should not limit it, and that I think is clear in your report, to the energy system alone, but we should broaden our examination and plans to the future evolution of other fundamental sectors such as industries, mobility, and heating. Third point, technologies will play a fundamental role, and their evolution will need to be integrated into long-term policy thinking. And we have to combine infrastructure, markets, incentives, regulation, and policies to keep our ambitions realistic. And that, I think, comes out quite clearly from the masterwork that you're presenting. The fourth point is about citizens. I mean, we have mentioned it this morning. Max has put a question on this. Policymakers cannot forget citizens. They are consumers of energy, and I think, to be honest, it's simply unacceptable that in the second millennium, energy poverty is still a reality, and this must be properly addressed in EU policies at the same time as the broader issue of the distributional impact of current and future climate policies. And a number of panelists this morning have recognized that by saying that there's a cost of this. And fifth and last remark, we clearly need to continue reviewing our policy and regulatory design. Policymakers and regulators will not necessarily find immediately the right solution, the right policy, the right regulatory provisions. So regulatory sandboxing, which is something that in CERRE we've been advocating in several sectors, and which is based on trials and errors. This could be appropriate in some specific situations. And I fully appreciate that this may go against the the regulatory stability that the private sector requires to invest in breakthrough technologies and make the difference. I think, however, it's imperative that industry accept the challenge and continue the conversation with regulators and with policymakers, and the conversation around sector coupling and its role in the decarbonized economy in particular. This is precisely why also we at CERRE are here and are present to facilitate and feed those conversations. So I'd like to thank all of you for your participation and for your support. Thank you to our authors, Michael and Kong. Thank you to our sponsors, the members of CERRE who have supported this and really helped us. And sometimes, and we've heard it this morning, they don't agree, and this is normal. They don't agree with everything which is in the report, and clearly some of them have different views on some aspects and others. I think this is part of the way we work at CERRE, and that's why eventually we are influential, because it's clear that what's coming out is at the same time based on the reality of your different businesses, because it is fed by your input, and it is also, as we heard, politically timely, and of course completed in full and sometimes very hardly defended independence for our researchers. Thank you also to the panelists. Thank you to you, our viewers. We hope you enjoyed the program. It was a bit long, but I think it was worthwhile. The report from Michael and Kong is available on our site for your analysis. And as I mentioned, the video of the event will also remain on CERRE's site and on CERRE's YouTube channel. You'll find the schedule of CERRE's next activities online. I hope we can count you in again soon. Until then, take care of yourself and of others. Bye-bye.